Karma can be funny. Take that time in 1966 when John Lennon compared the Beatles' popularity to that of Jesus. The resultant furor over what was actually an out-of-context statement was intense. Amidst predictions that lightning would strike the band for blasphemy, a Bible Belt radio station hosted a Beatles bonfires to burn the group's LPs. Lightning struck, but rather than take out the band, it hit the station's tower and knocked it off the air. Below are 20 things about that and other times when karma made a sweet appearance. It is hard to conceptualize the cultural impact of the Beatles half a century ago. Today, more than half a century after their 1960s heyday, it is hard to grasp just how big a phenomenon the Beatles were, as their popularity grew in Britain, fueled by hit singles like She Loves You, Please Please Me and From Me to You. Words failed to adequately express the fans' frenzied adulation. So journalists coined the term Beatlemania to describe the hysteria and high-pitched screams that accompanied the group wherever they went. Such intensity was compared to religious fervor, and for good reason. Some fans actually believed that the band had supernatural healing powers. When the Beatles crossed the pond in early 1964, they took the U.S. by storm. When the band performed before an audience of 55,000 at Shea Stadium, it marked the first time that an outdoor stadium had been put to such use. To safeguard them from the crush of their fans, both figurative and literal, the Beatles had to travel to their concerts in armored cars. As American teenagers screamed with delight, their parents just screamed, unsure what to make of the shaggy-topped foursome. Then in March 1966, John Lennon said in an interview with a London newspaper that the Beatles seemed to be more popular than Jesus. An interview that caused controversy, but not the expected one. John Lennon's comment that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus caused no controversy when published in Britain. When republished in America a few months later, however, the result was moral outrage. Lennon's statement was made in the context of a free-ranging interview with him and Paul McCartney. In it, McCartney criticized America's widespread racism and mistreatment of black people. "It's a lousy country where anybody black is a dirty nigger," he fumed. When the interview was republished in the American teen magazine Datebook on July 29, 1966, McCartney's comment led and only his face appeared on the cover. Datebook's editors assumed that it was what McCartney said that would create the most controversy. As things transpired, his words about America's race relations were widely ignored. Moralists made a beeline instead for Lennon's comment about the band being more popular than Jesus. Outrage swept through Christian communities across the country, especially in the Bible Belt. The furor erupted amid the band's 1966 U.S. tour and overshadowed much of it. The heated reaction led to a dose of comic karma, not against the Beatles, but against their outraged critics. Manufactured outrage by moralists elicits a dose of comic karma. As outrage grew about John Lennon's comment that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, he explained that the statement was taken out of context. He was actually ridiculing the notion that a group of musicians were being worshipped. In a series of press conferences, he denied that he was comparing himself to Christ and apologized. Neither explanations nor repeated apologies calmed the furor. Protests were held, threats were made, editorials called for the band's deportation, the Ku Klux Klan jumped in and began to picket Beatles concerts, and some radio stations ceased to play their songs. Some stations went further and organized Beatles bonfires, public burnings of the band's records. One such was Clue in Longview, Texas, which invited listeners to burn the band's records and other symbols of their popularity on August 13, 1966. Beatles' LPs and merchandise were burned, amidst imprecations and predictions made that lightning would strike the group for their blasphemy. Attendees included a KKK Grand Dragon, who nailed a Beatles record to a wooden cross. In that time and place, a KKK Grand Dragon's participation was positive PR for the radio station rather than negative. However, whatever PR benefit was gleaned by Clue did not last long. In a display of karma, rather than lightning striking the Beatles, the very next day lightning struck that station's transmission tower. It knocked out Clue's news editor and knocked the station off the air for quite some time. Karma makes a misogynist joke backfire. For much of history, men treated the idea of women's participation in politics as inconceivable, or as a joke. The latter is why in 1887 a cabal of men opposed to women's participation in politics nominated a woman for the office of mayor of Argonia, Kansas. They were the opposite of fans of women's empowerment. Their aim was to secure a massive defeat for the female candidate that would humiliate women and discourage them from voting or running for office. In a nutshell, the whole thing was a sexist prank, along the lines of "Nyuk Nyuk a woman mayor," how absurd type deals for misogynists to chortle over. Karma had something else in mind, however. As seen below, rather than lose, the female candidate Susanna Medora Salter won the election convincingly. That made her the first woman ever elected mayor in American history. To put even more egg on the prankster's face, she went on to capably fulfill the duties of her mayoral office. A crude joke to make women's participation in politics look ridiculous. American women were not guaranteed the right to vote until the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. However, women had been able to vote for decades before that in at least some states, where female voters were given the franchise in whole or in part. Kansas was one such state. There, the protracted struggle for women's right to political participation earned a partial victory in 1887, when women won the right to vote in municipal elections. For many opponents of women's suffrage, that heralded the world going to hell in a handbasket. Some such in the town of Argonia, Kansas, set out to demonstrate their contempt for the concept of women in politics with a prank that would place a woman's name on the mayoral ballot. She would of course lose, and everybody would get a laugh at the absurdity of females floundering about in the manly world of politics. Their chosen mark was Susanna M. Salter, born in 1860 into an Ohio Quaker family that moved to Kansas when she was 12 years old. Karma decided that she, rather than the pranksters, would get the last laugh. The seeds of a sexist joke. Susanna Salter had long been a low-key pioneer. When she was 20 years old, she attended the predecessor of today's Kansas State University. Unfortunately, because of ill health, she was forced to drop out just a few weeks before graduation. While she pursued her higher education, Salter met her future husband. After they got married in 1880, the couple moved to Argonia and started a family. Susanna became active in her local Women's Christian Temperance Union WCTU, an anti-alcohol organization that advocated prohibition. Temperance organizations generated many enemies, especially among those who profited from alcohol. When women got the right to vote in Kansas municipal elections in 1887, the WCTU made enforcement of the state's prohibition law its main issue and backed a slate of like-minded, male candidates. The WCTU's efforts to get women to exercise their newly won right to vote displeased some men. A group of about 20 guys from Argonia were particularly upset by both women's involvement in politics and by the WCTU's pro-prohibition stance. So they decided to kill two birds with one stone, get a good laugh, and discourage women from political participation. There was no legal requirement to secure candidates' consent before their names were placed on the ballots. So just before Argonia's 1887 municipal elections, they prepared a slate of candidates comprised of WCTU members, and Susanna Salter's name headed the list as candidate for mayor. Karma secures an unexpected win for women's political participation. Argonia's misogynist pranksters figured that no man would vote for a woman, and Susanna Salter would lose, the Women's Christian Temperance Union would be humiliated, women would learn their lesson, grow discouraged, and henceforth stay away from elections and politics. Thanks to karma, things did not work out the way the pranksters figured they would. When the polls opened on April 4, 1887, Susanna Salter was unaware that she was on the ballot. She first found out when a local Republican Party delegation went to her house to ask if she was actually running for mayor. She had not been until then. Asked if she would serve as mayor if actually elected, Salter said yes. The Republicans backed her and the WCTU abandoned its candidate and voted as a bloc for Salter. She won over 60% of the vote, and America got its first female mayor. Her term was relatively uneventful, but her election became global news. Domestic and foreign press frequently reported on Argonia's town meetings. Women's suffrage took a step forward, and instead of humiliation for female voters, Argonia's misogynistic pranksters were the ones humiliated. As to Salter, she eventually resettled in Oklahoma, where she lived to the ripe old age of 101 before she passed away in 1961. A great emperor's not-so-great treatment of his son. Emperor Constantine I, commonly known as Constantine the Great, had many admirers in his era. Christians were particularly grateful because he took Christianity out of the catacombs and into the palace. He also gave the Roman Empire a new lease on life, relocated the capital from Rome to the newly built Constantinople, and laid the foundations for an Eastern Roman Empire whose remnants survived into the 15th century. However, his admirers seldom mentioned his shortcomings, such as the mercurial temper that led him to kill his eldest son, Flavius Julius Crispus. It was especially unfortunate because from the available historical accounts, it seems that Crispus was the kind of dutiful and capable son who would have made any father proud. While still in his teens, Constantine appointed Crispus commander in Gaul, and he delivered. Crispus won victories in 318, 320 and 323 that secured the province and the Germanic frontier for his father. In a civil war against Valerius Licinius Licinius, a challenger to Constantine's claim on rulership of the Roman world, Crispus commanded his father's navy, and led it to a decisive victory over a far larger enemy fleet. A scheming stepmom. Crispus also played a key role in a subsequent battle that secured his father's triumph over Licinius. All signs indicated that Crispus was destined to go places, and that he would make a worthy successor to his father someday. Then in 326 his life came to a sudden end when his stepmother, eager to remove an obstacle to her own son's succession to the throne, falsely accused Crispus of having tried to assault her. An enraged Constantine had his eldest son tried, and convicted before a local court, then ordered him hanged. Flavia Maxima Fausta, daughter of the Roman Emperor Maximianus, was married to Constantine the Great in 307 to seal an alliance between him and her father. She bore Constantine 3 sons, but her stepson Crispus, Constantine's eldest from a previous marriage, stood between her kids and the throne. In 326 Crispus was at the height of his power, and the odds-on favorite to succeed Constantine, after he played a key role in the defeat of his father's chief challenger. So Fausta engineered his downfall. She succeeded, but as seen below, karma caught up with her. Karma catches up with Fausta. While Crispus went from success to success, and cemented his claim to imperial succession upon his father's death, his half-brothers Fausta's sons were in no position to don the purple. The eldest of them was only 10 years old at the time. In order for any of Fausta's sons to succeed Constantine, something would have to happen to Crispus. So Fausta saw to it that something did. She reportedly tried to seduce Crispus, but he balked and hurriedly left the palace. Undaunted, she lied to Emperor Constantine, and told him that Crispus did not respect his father, since he was in love with and had tried to rape his father's wife. Constantine believed her and had his eldest son executed. A few months later, however, karma caught up with Fausta, when Constantine discovered how she had manipulated, and got him to kill Crispus. As punishment, he had her boiled alive. He then issued a damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory, to erase her from official accounts, a form of dishonor issued against traitors and those who brought discredit to the Roman state. Vindictive karma catches up with monsters. As World War I raged, the Ottoman Turk authorities sought to end the restiveness of their oppressed Armenian citizens by ending the Armenians via genocide. They carried it out under the guise of relocating them from border regions to the interior of their empire. The Ottomans subjected the Armenians to massacres and death marches, interrupted by widespread and horrendous abuses that claimed the lives of 1 million to 1.5 million victims. After Turkey's defeat and surrender at war's end, desultory efforts were made to bring those responsible to account. However, no international tribunal existed to try the criminals, and their prosecution in Turkish courts eventually petered out because of domestic politics. At the end of World War I, an Ottoman military tribunal sentenced the principal leaders responsible for the Armenian genocide to death. However, the condemned were freed at the end of the trial. They promptly fled to Europe, where they lived under assumed names. Thus, those who had orchestrated the genocide escaped formal justice, and were able to travel relatively freely throughout much of Europe and Central Asia. As seen below, karma caught up with at least some of the key killers, when Armenian activists brought them to account Vigilante style. The decision to visit retributive karma upon monsters. Disgusted at the miscarriage of justice, some members of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, ARF, a nationalist party, decided to take matters into their own hands and bring the guilty to account. The ARF passed a resolution called the Special Mission to visit karma upon and punish the main perpetrators of the Armenian genocide. The result was Operation Nemesis, named after the ancient Greek goddess of divine retribution. Between 1920 to 1922, Armenian Avengers stalked those responsible for the genocide throughout Europe and Asia and dealt them lethal doses of karma. The first target claimed by the Avengers of Operation Nemesis was the first Prime Minister of independent Azerbaijan, Fatali Khan Koyski. He had played a prominent role in the massacre of tens of thousands of Armenians in Baku in 1918. Azerbaijan's independence did not last for long, and the Bolsheviks overran and incorporated it into the Soviet Union in 1920. That April, Koisky fled to Tiflis, Georgia to escape the Red Army as it overran his country. On June 19, Armenian revolutionary Aram Yerganian opened fire on Koisky in Tiflis Yerevan Square and killed him on the spot. The daylight vigilante execution of an architect of genocide on the streets of Berlin. Next to fall to Operation Nemesis was Mehmed Talat Pasha, one of a triumvirate known as the Three Pashas who had ruled the Ottoman Empire throughout World War I. Talat had initiated the Armenian genocide in 1915, while he served as Minister of Interior Affairs. He fled the Ottoman Empire in early November 1918, aboard a German submarine, and settled in Berlin. He was tried in absentia by a Turkish court-martial, and sentenced to death. However, the Turks were not that eager to have him extradited, and the Germans denied knowledge of his whereabouts. In reality, Talat's presence in Germany was a semi-open secret, and he traveled throughout much of Central Europe and Scandinavia without hindrance. That state of affairs lasted until 1921 when Karma and Operation Nemesis caught up with him. An Armenian revolutionary named Soghomen Plerian discovered Talat's Berlin address, rented an apartment nearby, and studied his every move. On March 15, 1921, he shadowed Talat, and when he confirmed his target's identity, pulled out a Luger pistol and shot him dead in broad daylight. He then waited over the corpse for the police to arrive and arrest him. Plerian's murder trial was a sensation, and he used it as a platform to draw attention to the Armenian genocide. His lawyers focused on Plerian's mental state. He testified that he had acted after his mother, killed during the atrocity, had appeared to him in a dream, and berated him for his failure to avenge her. It took a Berlin jury 1 hour to acquit him, and return a verdict of not guilty on grounds of temporary insanity. The most depraved of the Turkish monsters of the Armenian genocide. Jamal Azmi, known as the Butcher of Trebizond, might have been the most abhorrent of Operation Nemesis targets, and the one who most deserved its brand of lethal karma. He was a founder of the Teşkilat-i Mahsusa special organization, a unit created to suppress dissent and separatism in the Ottoman Empire. Azmi was the governor of Trebizond province when the Armenian genocide began in 1915. An enthusiastic participant, he massacred Armenians by the tens of thousands. He was particularly vicious towards Armenian children and women, and had thousands of them drowned in the Black Sea. Witnesses testified that he had turned a local hospital into a pleasure dome, where he indulged in sexual orgies with young Armenian girls before he murdered them. Azmi gleefully reminisced about it, and told an acquaintance, among the most pretty Armenian girls, 10 to 13 years old, I selected a number of them and handed them to my son as a gift. The others I had drowned in the sea. After the war he fled to Germany, and the organizers of Operation Nemesis eventually tracked him down in Berlin. His execution was assigned to Aram Yerganian, an activist who had already killed one of the Retribution campaign's targets. In addition to Azmi, Yerganian was also tasked with the execution of another genocide accomplice, Dr. Behayedin Shakir. Arshaver Shirakian, another Armenian revolutionary, was assigned to Yerganian as his partner. Lethal karma catches up with a monster and with another of Turkey's 3 murderous Pashas. On April 17, 1922, karma caught up with Jamal Azmi and Behayedin Shakir. That day Aram Yerganian and Ashavi Shirakian came upon the 2 murderers while they strolled Berlin's Uhlenstrasse with their families. Shirakian opened fire and killed Azmi, but only wounded Behayedin, who ran for his life. Yerganian took off after the genocideer, caught up with him, and finished him with a bullet to the head. Neither shooter was apprehended. They were not the last prominent Turkish genocideers dealt doses of lethal karma by Operation Nemesis. Ahmed Cemal Pasha was another of the 3 Pashas, who had ruled the Ottoman Empire in World War I, also known as Al-Safa or the Bloodshedder. Cemal Pasha was one of the key participants in the Armenian genocide. After the war, Ahmed Cemal fled to Germany, then to Switzerland. A Turkish court-martial sentenced him to death in absentia. In 1920 he headed to Afghanistan, where he worked on the modernization of its army. As the Bolshevik Revolution and the Russian Civil War roiled the neighboring USSR, Cemal headed to Tiflis, Georgia, to negotiate with the Soviets on behalf of Afghanistan. There a trio of Armenian revolutionaries, Petros Taras Pagasyan, Trashas Gevorgian, and Stepan Zagagian, assassinated him and his secretary on July 21, 1922. He was the last major genocideer dealt his just dose of karma by Operation Nemesis. The rise of little boots. Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus was one of Rome's most depraved emperors. He earned the nickname by which he is better known to history, Caligula, Little Boots, because of the miniature legionary outfits he wore as a child while he accompanied his father on military campaigns. He grew to become emperor of Rome from 37 to 41 AD, and is probably the gold standard for crazy rulers. He was raised by his uncle, the Roman Emperor Tiberius, a paranoid odd fish in his own right, who spent much of his reign as a recluse in a pedophilic pleasure palace in Capri. Tiberius did surface on occasion to order the execution of relatives accused of treason. They included Caligula's mother and 2 brothers. He had probably poisoned Caligula's father as well. A great natural actor, Caligula hid any resentment felt towards his uncle. He thus survived the bitter Tiberius, who named him heir and quipped, "I am rearing a viper for the Roman people." Life with Tiberius left its mark on Caligula. Once freed of the ever-present threat of execution by his paranoid uncle, the combination of sudden freedom and sudden unlimited power went to his head. He cut loose and spent lavishly to gratify all his hedonistic whims. Rome's most depraved emperor. Caligula kicked off the weirdness early. A soothsayer had predicted that he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. So Caligula ordered a 2-mile bridge built across the bay, then rode his horse across it while clad in the breastplate and armor of Alexander the Great. Other examples include the time when he began to cackle uncontrollably at a party. When asked what was funny, Caligula replied that he found it hilarious that with a mere gesture of his finger, he could have the throat of anybody present slit, right then and there. Another example is the time he was annoyed by an unruly crowd at the Circus Maximus, so he pointed out a section of the stands to his guards, pointed out 2 bald guys, and ordered them to execute everybody from bald head to bald head. On another occasion, he got bored in an arena when he was told that there were no more criminals to throw to the beasts, a common form of execution at the time. So he ordered a section of the crowd thrown to the wild animals. His depravities included incest with his sisters. At dinner parties he frequently ordered guests' wives to his bedroom, and after he had his way with them, returned to the party to rate the quality of their performance and berated the cuckolded husbands for any of their wives' shortcomings in bed. He also turned the imperial palace into a whorehouse, staffed with the wives of prominent senators and other dignitaries. As seen below, Karma eventually caught up with Little Boots. Karma catches up with Caligula. To show his contempt for the Roman senatorial class, and the Roman Republic for which they pined, Caligula had his beloved horse made consul, the Republic's highest magistracy. On one occasion, Caligula declared war on the sea god Neptune, marched his legions to the sea, and had them collect seashells to show him who was boss. He eventually declared himself a god, removed the heads from various deities' statues, and replaced them with his own. However, when Karma finally caught up with Caligula, it was not because of the craziness above. Instead, it was because he offended his own bodyguards. Caligula's Praetorian Guard security detail was under the command of a tribune named Cassius Chera. He had a high-pitched voice and Caligula liked to mimic it and mock him as effeminate. The emperor also thought it was the height of hilarity to come up with derogatory daily passwords that had to do with homosexuality. Whenever Chorea was due to kiss the imperial ring, Caligula made sure it was on his middle finger and waggled it obscenely. Chorea finally had enough, and in 41 AD he hatched an assassination plot with other Praetorian guards. Caligula finally got a dose of lethal karma when his own bodyguards ambushed and hacked him up. China's great emperor. Qin Shi Huang, first emperor of Qin, started off as ruler of the Chinese state of Qin, one of several rival kingdoms in China's Warring States period. He ascended the throne as a child and in his teens. He wrested power from the regents and courtiers, who had governed during his minority. To consolidate his power, the young monarch massacred palace plotters who sought to usurp his prerogatives. He then went on the warpath, pushed back the northern barbarians, defeated and conquered all other Chinese states by 221 BC, and consolidated them under his rule. Once he accomplished all that, he declared himself the first emperor of a united China. Shi Huang's upside was that he was the first to unify the core of China into a single realm. His downside was that he was a megalomaniacal monster. It was a downside that invited Karma to pay him an unwelcome visit. To consolidate his newly conquered empire, he standardized the currency weights and measures, and introduced a system of government known as legalism, based on strict laws and harsh punishments. He ended feudalism, which had produced centuries of warfare, and replaced it with a centralized, bureaucratic and meritocratic government. A megalomaniacal emperor. To keep the nobility in check, Qin Shi Huang kept those he favored in the capital. He controlled them with pensions and fancy titles, and thus transformed them from an uncontrollable warrior class into dependents and tame courtiers. He then abolished all aristocratic titles and ranks, except for those created and bestowed by him, and had the rest of the nobility killed or put to work. As a matter of fact, Shi Huang put everybody to work. With unchecked power and the resources of an entire empire to draw upon, he grew megalomaniacal. He launched huge projects with massive amounts of forced labor, such as his tomb, whose construction required the toil of 700,000 laborers for 30 years. The famous Terracotta Warriors site, discovered in the 1970s and now open to tourists with its thousands of life-size statues, is but a fraction of Shi Huang's gigantic tomb complex. The bulk of it is yet to be unearthed. Millions more labored to dig canals, level hills, make roads and build over 700 palaces. The biggest project of all was the Great Wall of China. It did double duty, kept the northern barbarians out, and the Chinese who sought to flee Shi Huang's heavy taxation and oppressive rule in.